Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back to Drums and Drams. My name is Cameron, and this is the first episode in a brand new series that I am calling Quick Sips. For a while now, I have wanted to start a new video series where I could do some shorter reviews, maybe between 5 to 8 minutes long, where I focus on sample bottles that have been sent to me, because those things are really starting to pile up, or even niche offerings from distilleries that might not otherwise get a full review from me. Now, I'm sure I'm going to mix in some bottles from mainstay distilleries across the whiskey world as this series progresses, but it's going to be a shorter format with less editing. That way I can knock more of these things out and have some more frequent content without those 12 to 20 minute full review videos that I do that, they take a lot of time to edit, to shoot B-roll, to prep for, and all of that kind of stuff. So for this first episode, I'm going to stay local here in Columbus, Ohio, and focus on two special offerings, limited releases from the Watershed Distillery. Now, before I get into it, I have to say thank you to Nick and Austin from the Bourbon Collective here in Columbus, Ohio, for providing these samples. I wish I had the bottles to show you as well. Maybe I'll throw them up here at some point in the video, but what we have today are the Watershed Apple Brandy finished barrel strength bourbon, and also the Watershed Nocino finished barrel strength bourbon as well. So let me get things set up here. Let me pull up the web page for Watershed just so I can give you a little bit of background about these. Keep this nice and short, get these samples poured, and get you on your way. So the first one we're going to be tasting is this Watershed Nocino finish. And the deal here is that we have a bourbon that is aged just under 5 years. I don't know the finishing time in the Nocino barrel. And what Nocino is, if you don't know, is just this, this walnut liqueur. I'm not super familiar with it. I know that I have tasted it at one point or another, but I don't remember much about it, unfortunately. So that's what we're going to be starting with. And then we're going to move to the Apple Brandy finished barrel strength bourbon from Watershed, which is 6 years old. So just a little bit older than the Nocino finish. Now, I know that not only does this Nocino finished bourbon get a lot of hype in the Columbus area, but actually the Nocino liqueur itself is pretty highly regarded. So I'm curious to try that. And of course, when I'm thinking about Apple Brandy finished bourbons, the Bardstown Copper and Kings collaboration comes to mind. So that's sort of my frame of reference as I go through and taste this Watershed version of their Apple Brandy finished barrel strength bourbon. So I think that's all I've got to say here. We're going to start with the Nocino, like I said. And in terms of proof, I don't know if this is the particular release I'm tasting, but on the website, I see 110.9 proof. So right around that 55% ABV. So let's check out the Nocino finished bourbon here on the nose. Okay, so totally different kind of nose than I was expecting here. I have a Chattanooga Apricot brandy finish from their experimental distillery, and the nose on this actually reminds me a bit of that. And it also reminds me a little bit of Woodinville, if you've ever had that. There's this sort of, I don't know, this sort of funk in there that I don't know exactly how to place. In some ways, it's almost a little bit latexy. Not in the same way that you would have like a peated scotch or anything, but there is sort of this outdoorsy type smell to it. It's very weird. Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and taste it on the palate before I go back to the nose, because this is a really confusing nose for me. Oh, wow. Very, very sweet here on the Nocino finish. Wow, yeah, super sweet. The mouthfeel is great on this one. You can see my eyes watering. First sip of bourbon for the day. At this proof, what I'm assuming is around 55% ABV, the mouthfeel is amazing. It's non-chill filtered, of course, that's going to help it out there. Yeah, you get that real outdoorsy, funky smell. You get a really rich, sort of syrupy caramel note in here. In terms of fruitiness, nothing really stands out on the fruit side of things. Most of what's going on here is that very sugary, sweet, syrupy, caramelized type thing. Let's try it again. Definite like cherry notes in here. Strong vanilla. That walnut thing, that's got to be what this strange funk in here is. I think it's black walnut liqueur is what they call it. Very, very sweet, almost a little too sweet to me, but I can totally see why people would love this bourbon. I think this would be a great offering for someone who maybe likes that Angel's Envy rye type character, which is, again, pretty sweet for me. I'm trying to think of some other really sweet bourbons, but I'm sure it would make an amazing cocktail, although you probably wouldn't want to with a limited release like this. I'm liking it more than I thought I would after the very first nosing. Yeah, and you know what else it smells like is in here? It's almost like that orange curacao type note. When you get orange curacao finished bourbons, like the one that Bardstown Bourbon Company did, you tend to get this really sweet, I guess, liqueur note, and that's also what's going on in here. Yeah, but I can't help but draw comparisons between that Chattanooga apricot brandy finish, maybe the sweetness of the Angel's Envy rye, and then also those orange curacao finished bourbons. So if you like sweet, you're going to really enjoy this Watershed Nocino finished bourbon. For me, this might be something I sip around the holidays like once or twice a year because it's just really, really sweet. Yeah, and no real oaky notes or leathery notes in here for me. And that's really just because that sweetness is overtaking most of what's going on in here. So I think this bourbon could have done with, I don't know, let's say 2/3 or half of the finishing time that they gave it, and it might be a better, more well-rounded product with a little less sweetness going on. But again, that sweet orange curacao note. There's a good bit of spice in here, like that Christmas spice, which is nice. And then those rich, sugary, sweet caramels and all that kind of thing. So great. Glad I had the opportunity to try that, the Nocino finished bourbon. But now we are moving on to the one that I'm more excited about, which is the Watershed Apple Brandy finish. Let me pull this page up very quickly, give you a couple little notes here. Like I said, this is about 6 years old, bottled at barreled strength, and the barrels that they're using to finish this one, the Apple Brandy barrels, are their own in-house Apple Brandy barrels. Watershed produces an Apple Brandy, so they're not collaborating with any outside companies for this. Now, with that said, I'm sure these Apple Brandy barrels are pretty young. You know, the juice that they held previously, I don't think is very old. So we'll see if that factors into how these things taste, or you know, how the finishing really impacts the base bourbon here. Huh, very interesting. This almost has a neutral spirit quality to it, and actually almost like a gin quality. If I had to kind of place this, I know that Watershed makes clear spirits, as many, you know, craft distilleries do, but this almost has that juniper, very floral and herbaceous quality to it. Yeah, the more I smell this, it's a little bit off-putting. Yeah, now let's talk proof very quickly on here. The release that I have pulled up on the screen here on their website says 119.3 proof, so just under 60% ABV. Just like with the Nocino finish, I'm not sure if that's this exact bottling or not, if there are different editions. And the whole point of this video series is not to go into too much depth here. So, you know, we're just getting a feel for this product in and of itself, but probably right around 60% ABV. Yeah, I could get a little bit of nuttiness on here, but almost like almond nuttiness, not that peanut thing that you get from a lot of different bourbons. There actually is a little bit of oak funk on the nose if you dig below the sweetness. This one is also a very sweet bourbon, but in a very different way than the Nocino finish. The Nocino has that liqueur orange curacao, cloyingly sweet characteristic. This one's a little more in balance. a little less granular in terms of the way it smells. The sweetness is not that overpowering, but I get a little bit of fruitiness in here, a little bit of, like I said, that oak funk at the very, very base, and some of this almond characteristic. I know it's apple brandy finished, but I'm getting not a ton of apple. I'm getting more of that juniper floral note. All right, on the palate. Great mouthfeel, great presence. And the development here is really nice. From the front palate, the flavors are a little bit not what I'm digging. And that's, of course, very subjective to whoever's drinking this. But from the front of palate, it hits you and it blossoms. It actually develops. And I really like that about it. Mouthfeel is on point. I've got to assume non-chill filtered, even though I don't believe it's saying that here on the website that I can find. But there's a really grassy note in here. It really, really tastes like freshly cut grass on the palate now as it's getting into the finish. Yeah, and I'm not digging that. That's not great. When you come back to the nose, there's definitely some baked apple pie on the nose, which I like. That really caramelized apple characteristic. But it's just mixing with this gin note that I cannot get over. Yeah, the almond is still there. That slight oak. All right, one more sip. No. It's just like a funky gin on the front palate. The spice development afterwards is pretty good. And now we're into that freshly cut grass thing. Now, this is not for me. If you enjoy gin and you don't mind a little bit of crossover in the spirits you're drinking, you might dig this. The apple brandy finish is not imparting, what I expect from an apple brandy finished bourbon. Again, I'm using the Bardstown collaboration as sort of my benchmark here, for better or worse. I mean, that's 11-year, 21% rye MGP, which is great bourbon to start with, then being finished for a full 18 months in Copper and King's apple brandy barrels. Yes, that is in a different league here. But I always like to talk about the fact that the market does have these benchmarks, and we have to kind of know what's out there and what we're going to be compared to. And this release from Watershed, just not doing it for me. I actually prefer the Nocino finish, which is a younger bourbon. It's sweeter, which are both things that I tend to not like, but it's more balanced and just more pleasant than this apple brandy finish, which to me is just like a funky flavored gin. So let me do one last smell of the Nocino. Oh yeah, and now the Nocino has this very rich brown sugar note on the nose, which is amazing. And then you go here and it's just gin. It's just gin on the nose. So my recommendation of these two would be the Nocino finished bourbon if you can find it. No matter which one of these I'm looking at, I'm not going to be purchasing either of them, and I think they're pretty expensive, around that $70, $80 mark, if I remember correctly, from when the apple brandy finish was released. So this has been the first episode of Quick Sips. A little bit of a negative review, and unfortunately, that's just the reality of how some of these things go. Watershed has never been a big, a distillery that I like here in Columbus so much. I was looking forward to these releases, but unfortunately, they're falling a little bit flat for me. I tend to like Middle West here in Columbus, Ohio, if I am thinking local, and I'm very excited to be reviewing some of their bourbons, their cask strength offerings here very soon. So I think that's all I've got for this video. If you haven't already, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, drop me a line if you have anything you want me to review, comment or email. You can find that in the description below. But until next time, I will see you all later here on Drums and Drams. I'm going to go ahead and end with this Nocino finished bourbon. So cheers to all of you, and I will see you next time.